the underbelly of dressage saddle design, fashion and function. Welcome to this series on saddle design. I'm Ian Bidstrup, a spinal rehabilitation veterinarian who for 20 years was the lead presenter, instructor and manual editor for the Accredited Saddle Fitters of Australasia. Enjoy. In this first part of what is a much bigger presentation, we'll look at the challenge of choosing a saddle, the points of the underside of the saddle, the basics of saddle structure and at critical aspects of the saddle platform and the girth area. Saddle design is such a minefield for horse owners. If you're looking for a new saddle, how are you going to decide what sort of saddle design features you're going to be wanting for your particular horse? There are so many options and so many different opinions out there. And how do you know what is good and what is not so good for your horse? Using Olympians to pick the best saddle would be an easy way to go around it. You'd have a very easy, straightforward process. However, not only do the horses that Olympians ride varies a great deal from our normal horse, they get better ridden than the average horse. They receive higher levels of exercise and higher levels of back care. The elite horses' backs are usually much more muscled, the horse is much fitter and stronger, and the posture of horses much better. So as much as we would like to think our horses are every bit as wonderful as an Olympic horse, they rarely match the profile of one. And usually the saddles that work well for the elite horses are not actually the perfect ones for our own individual horse, our best mate. Let's go on with that exploration. To go back to the basics, the role of the saddles is to provide a secure, comfortable and balanced platform for the rider. And at the same time, it needs to be a comfortable interface between the rider and the horse, so that the horse is most comfortable. Both these aims are interrelated. If the rider is not comfortable and well balanced, the horse's action and performance will be affected negatively. If the horse is not as comfortable as possible, its posture, movement and performance too will be badly affected. Let's also look at a few basic points of the saddle, so we're all speaking the same language when we go through these design elements. We all know the pommel and the cantle of the saddle. We've got the saddle seat, of course. We've got the twist of the saddle, which we'll go into a bit more in a second. We've got the tree point and the stirrup bar. These are all important parts of the design of the saddle. The twist of the saddle varies through different brands and different options within brands, and that's something to be considered. The billets, the panels, the tree with inside. We'll talk about all of these different things in different parts of the saddle. Underneath the saddle, the saddle panel is not just the same all the way through. It has different components, the seat panel, the waist panel and the tree point panel, and we'll talk about the different aspects of those. The gullet underneath the head of the saddle starts here and continues right through. In this area we tend to call it the channel, and that in itself is a very important issue too. The tree is the framework of the saddle. It's the heart of the saddle structure. The trees are made to match the anatomy of the horse's back. They vary in materials, flexibility and adaptability. Their role is to support the panels under the saddle and the rider's seat above. And together with the panels, the tree is there to spread the pressure from the rider's weight over a larger area as practical. The tree is the anchor for the other components of the saddle, such as the girth billets, the stirrup bars, the foundation of the gullet or head plate of the saddle. This is just to give you a view of the saddle tree from underneath. In a traditional tree, there's webbing under here to hold things together and create the seat for the rider. In this plastic tree, it's built in, and you can see the tree point down here and a gullet plate in this case. The saddle panels sit between the tree and the horse, of course. They vary a lot in size and shape, and we'll discuss that. But they're an individual item in itself. To be able to understand the importance of different saddle designs, it's also important that we understand the sensitivities of the horse's back. The tips of the bone of the wither are one of the fundamental areas. We learned this as a very young rider to avoid pressure on this region here. You can see a little bit of wear here from a rug, but the saddle shouldn't actually come in contact with these tips. There's not a lot between the tips and the skin surface. The wither muscle is a very important area because it carries a big load. And if we look at it as just one homogeneous lot of muscle, then we actually miss the point that all these muscles are not the same. The ones that are actually compressed against the bone, the spinalis thoracis and the end of the multifidus here, these are the ones most susceptible to any pressure coming on them. Down here, these muscles are much less susceptible because they carry more of a horizontal load against the rib cage. The trapezius and rhomboid usually don't suffer any great pressure effects. It's when the muscle is squeezed against the bone. The other thing about this spinalis thoracis muscle is very often when there's dysfunction of the spine through the upper thoracic area, this muscle in itself is quite hyperactive, hypersensitive, and any great pressure on that muscle causes quite a bit of trouble. We've got other little skin muscles as well underneath here. They sort of finish about here, but their effects are felt right up here that move the skin up here. If they're sensitized by spinal dysfunction, then they can cause a lot of grief through the wither area as well. So looking at the spinalis, it basically starts at the base of the wither and goes across in a triangular shape, but it ends up at the base of the neck. So if it's tight, it'll pull up the base of the neck. And we've got to be particularly mindful that saddles not only provide downward pressure, but they provide inward pressure, and that inward pressure increases as this angle gets more acute. For a flat withered horse, it's mainly horizontal pressure. For a more acute withered horse, there's a lot more inward pressure. So the more we can transfer the weight out here, the better for the horse. The small muscles surrounding the vertebrae are also ones that we've got to take particular care of. Not only are they very sensitive muscles, they are involved with the control of the spinal column in itself. Also, when it comes to the saddle seat area, they're very easily trapped against the bone in horses that have lost muscle over their back and haven't got a very good protective fat layer either. So we need to really watch that these are taken care of. It's particularly important if saddles are slipping to one side as well, because the saddle channel will come over and the panels will come more onto those more central little muscles. The rib angles is another area we've got to protect. If we put too much pressure on these rib angles, and that's the area from where the rib changes from being fairly horizontal up here to being fairly vertical. And in more sprung ribs, that's less obvious, but in a fitter event, it's quite obvious that there is a big change between these two elements of the rib. The actual angle of the change is called the rib angle, and there's usually a notch that's associated with muscle attachments. If there's too much pressure put on top of those little muscles, they can become very painful. So it's another area we've got to protect. We'll talk more about this area down the track because that's just as important. The saddle seat area under our seat bones is actually the weakest part of the horse's back, contrary to some of the things you hear about the horse's back strength. So that's about this area here. It's the furthest from the front leg and it's the furthest from the hind leg. So it's sort of hanging in the middle of a bridge, if you like. It's not supported by the sternum like the first 8 vertebrae are here. It is just supported by the abdominal muscles. And if these abdominal muscles are not active and strong, then this area can drop, and that can leave them very susceptible to pressure in that area. Contrary to popular belief too, this area, the lumbar area, is not the weakest part of the back. It's actually one of the strongest parts of the back. It's where circus riders will stand when they're going around in circles. And why would they stand on the weakest part of the horse's back? Pain at the rear of the saddle seat is a really common entity where you've got a belly dropping like this one, because you've got a drop through here and the loin tends to go up, and you've got a junctional area where the end of the rib cage occurs and the start of the loin, and that area gets quite stressed as a result of this upward and downward movement in opposite directions. It is an area that we often see painful strain in horses. Even in a horse with not such great back muscling like this can have quite a lot of strain in that portion of the back. Horses that have a really nice straight back through here, like a quarter horse with a really strong back, we don't see that strain element so much, and we don't see this pain in this junctional area hardly at all, and they're much less prone to trouble with saddles that creep or go towards the back of the rib cage. Whereas horses like this one and this one cannot handle long saddles at all. The girth area is one we've got to protect in two ways. We've got to make sure that the girth is suitable, and we'll talk about that more later. But this is also a sensitized area of the horse. When I say sensitized, when there's spinal dysfunction under the shoulder blade that can sensitize the nerve, just like our lower back can be very tight and tender when we've got back trouble. When a horse has got upper thoracic spinal dysfunction, which is super common in horses, then they can be very sensitive, not only through the wither but down into the girth. If you want to know more about this, and it's something you should know plenty about, then go on to my Spinal Vet Education channel, and there's a video there dedicated just to the girth, and there's also one on birth trauma which highly interrelates with this. When we're talking about just the physical pressure on the girth area, this is the area we've got to protect the most. This area here where the ribs meet the sternum, the costochondral junction, is one that really is susceptible to damage. We've got the ascending pectoral muscle here that is coming against this sort of hard angular change, and too much pressure on that can lead to a lot of pain. So we'll be talking about girth structures. This one, for that matter, is effectively only about that wide, and despite its padding, is not a particularly good girth for the horse. In part 2, we look at the components of the underbelly of the saddle, starting with the saddle tree. See you there.